Free-to-play fighting games, right? The most crazy topic I might have ever have tackled on this channel. And while there is a few examples of it going right and allowing people to essentially jump into the game for relatively low barrier of entry / low cost, there's a lot of examples of, hey, you know what? Instead of you spending 150 bucks on all the expansions of your fighting game as they come out, how about you spend 6,000? And that's where a lot of people's brains immediately go. A lot of people immediately go towards a very huge negative situation, like the polar opposite, the black and white, like the exact polar opposite. Gotcha boxes and grind for 16 weeks to play a character and all this crazy stuff, because the perspective for so many people on free-to-play games is vastly different. And in my perspective, I only have like a couple. You know, I only have a couple where I've actually seen things allow for communities to thrive, but bring success to the game that didn't exploit the crap out of its user base. But the issue is that, yeah, like I don't blame people, because I'm once again seeing things from an optimistic perspective that, like, holy shit, like this would be great. A lot of people have run into moments where the free-to-play elements of their games have essentially ruined it. And this has led to friggin' chair spinning moments on my stream where it's like, oh my god, this is what you're doing to your game. Holy shit. I think one of the better examples of all this crazy stuff that's happened lately is what's going on with Halo Infinite. Halo Infinite decided that they would split off, and I actually think that was a great idea, to split off its single-player campaign from its multiplayer and be like, hey, you know what? The multiplayer was free. I think it's a good example. But Halo Infinite's currently going through some big issues because of the way they approached their free-to-play. I think most will agree that Halo Infinite was actually kind of fun, right? The core game was quite good. And from what I can gather about the issue of what's going on, they don't have any content, and there was some super shitty things they were doing with their battle pass as far as actually leveling up. There were some decisions that were put into place at an early level of management that really would piss people off. And that's a unique situation, and not exactly weird for a game like Halo Infinite. We've heard for years had poor management issues, that creative directors and lead people in charge of huge elements of that game just pieced out halfway through development. It isn't, and even though the game came out relatively well, I didn't beat it, but you know, it seems pretty good. And the multiplayer did come out fairly well from what it seems like. Man, they actually tightened this up. That 9-month delay really helped. But man, now they have an issue that they don't know how to keep up with this free-to-play aspect of it. They can't keep up with the content. They don't have the employees to do it. The management behind it was just super messed up. It's an interesting conversation for fighting games, right? Because fighting games have to essentially keep up with the content. They have to keep up with these crazy battle passes if you want to do this kind of shit, right? You're gonna have to, if there was a free-to-play element in a fighting game, like, my god, man, like, how much more stuff are you gonna do? You're gonna run into a Halo Infinite situation. Here's my argument towards that. Aren't they already doing that? Aren't most fighting games that have adopted the season pass model getting relatively updated every 3-ish months and giving you either a new character or new balance changes or new costumes? Like, it seems like we've already got that. Like, they kind of have to do it to keep into the same perspective of what's going on. Killer Instinct was releasing a new character every 2 months. Some fighting games have tried to do this already, and some have worked and some have not. Rising Thunder is a great example of that. Rising Thunder was completely free, right? Practically never left its beta stage, but went offline. And then nobody could essentially play the game or acquire the game until like years later, where the devs were like, hey, it's back. You can just have it now. Cool. That's a big issue, right? That the game was essentially designed to be sort of online. The first foray, I think, a fighting game actually tried to do this free-to-play thing that I remember was in the same year as a couple of other efforts. We got to talk about DOA. And yeah, DOA's got all the crazy, scummy extra DLC, all the crazy cosmetics that you can spend thousands of bucks on. Yeah, I get it. But DOA 5 launched back in 2012, and it bombed. It didn't do well. They released a thing called the Core Fighters Pack, which either had like 4 or 6 characters. I didn't actually play it after this. Actually had 4 or 6 characters. Gave people a chance to play the game in some way for free. Like, hey, you just want to try the game? Go ahead, right? You want to crank your age up to 99 and see everything jiggle? Have fun, buddy. You want to invest into the deep mechanics of, you know, the counter system? Enjoy. But you only get these characters. And guess what? It worked. It actually worked. It allowed people a way to play the game, and people bought costumes, they bought DLC, if not people that tried it, eventually converted over. And DOA 5 ended up getting Virtua Fighter characters and all this crazy shit, right? It actually ended up being a really big game. But it was at the expense of a negative word of mouth that would eventually build from Tecmo that, look at all this crazy DLC they got. My God. So I don't know if that's exactly the best way to do it. It worked for them. It allowed people to jump in and play. And there would definitely be crazy folks that would have to buy every bikini for Kasumi or something like that, or every one of the DOA girls. I get it. But that's not something that I think works super well. In the same year, Soul Calibur Lost Sword and Tekken Revolution happened. I didn't play Lost Swords, but from what I understood, it functioned on the same level of Tekken Revolution. You had to buy like a coin system, and by buying the coins, you essentially could play the game a little bit, but if you wanted to play it more, that would cost you money. Yeah, gameplay was limited. This is a perfect example of how much free-to-play has changed over the years and how absolutely stale and shitty it was a long time ago. How absolutely gross some of this shit is. If there's one thing I hate is pay to eventually, like, pay for time. I hate that. And if there is one thing that I also hate is that grind for things. I fucking hate that. I can't fucking stand the grind for things. I can't stand the grind for things in games that I've paid for, right? And granted, this is one thing that really irked me about MK11 at the start. It's something I just personally cannot stand. Just prevent me from using all my time, because I actually find that more valuable. Those games come out, not good. Nobody likes them. But there's context, right? A lot of people are like, you know what, Max, they already did this. It's called Tekken Revolution and Soul Calibur Lost Swords. They already did that. But those games were just piggybacking off of Tekken Tag 2 and Soul Calibur 5. Two games, by the way, that the majority of the community didn't really like, for the most part. I didn't mind them. And did not sell well. Soul Calibur 5 didn't sell well. Tekken Tag 2 did not end up selling super well. So it's weird that you would make free-to-play versions of those games that already pissed people off. Of course this wasn't going to work out, right? Of course this isn't something that people are going to be super down and willing. Of course not, man. So those are already a couple of examples of fighting game efforts that have been put into that were free to play a long time ago that have soured the well. And then 2013 comes along. Killer Instinct shows up. A game that is literally sent to die. Killer Instinct is sent an early deathbed. It's on a console that everybody hates, and it is on a box that is actively spying on you and taking your information, and nobody's happy. They were trying to do something a bit different with it. They were trying to add free-to-play elements to it. They wanted people to be able to jump in and play the game in like a trial, right? A free-to-play sort of trial. I call these like free-to-try. If anything, I call DOA and what KI does free-to-try, because it's like a way of doing it. Over time, it does well, and it gets another season, and it gets another season, and it gets like a final season. And like 4-ish, 5-ish years later, the game is still being updated, and then the entire division that made Killer Instinct, literally, the Xbox Live Arcade division is dissolved, right? Microsoft completely changes how their entire company works. Long story short, it's not being supported anymore. However, as of 2017, it hit 10 million downloads. And what did KI do? It's a little complicated, but KI allowed people to try like Jago and a rotating character. You can play like the core game for free. Everything in the game is free, right? You can go in and just play arcade mode. You go play shadow modes. You can go play online mode. Jago is your character. Or you can wait and the rotating character of Saberwolf or whatever might eventually come along to be something you want. Free to try, right? Not really free to play. But what they did offer was a system that allowed people to play the game if you did not want to spend 20 bucks. If you did not want to drop 20 bucks on the game, you could spend a very small amount of money on one character and just have that character and have the entire game, right? If you don't want to deal with the rotating shit. And even if you spent a certain amount of money, if it eventually got to 20 bucks, then you get the whole game. Overall, KI, with all of its seasons, each came out at 20 bucks. There's $40 options for costumes. But at like the 20 buck option, if you want the core game, KI ended up costing about $60, right? Now, we're not talking about definitive editions. We're not. We're talking about the game as it came out, as you buy it. You just play the game and you unlock the colors. You just play the game and... I'm sorry, the skins were paid for, right? People don't really complain about the skins, but all the skins cost 20 bucks technically per season. So KI at least had a model that allowed people to jump in and do it. Now it's a different story. Now the game is just on Game Pass, right? Now the game is actually free to play if you have an Xbox Live subscription. It was an effort, is what it was. And guess what? It worked. It worked substantially. KI ended up having, like I said, 10 million downloads back in 2017 before the Steam version came out. But I'd imagine now, with 5 years later, even before it was on Game Pass, it probably was eclipsing 13 million, if not even more. So I can't even tell you on Games Pass now how many people still play KI. And I can tell you at least, I'll jump onto the game on ranked on stream ass late in the evening, like a crazy late evening gameplay session, and I'll still run into noobs in ranked. Believe it or not. Like, I'll actually run into people that are like relatively low-level KI players out of a game that's almost 10 years old. I'm like, what the shit? That does not happen. That doesn't happen very often. It didn't go all the way, right? It didn't go fully into the free-to-play territory. It didn't go... It was an attempt. And I think it was a pretty decent attempt, although a really confusing one, and one that I think you can go even further. So to summarize things from this point forward, there's a couple of efforts. These are like 10-year ago efforts. This is KI also created the season pass model, right? They created that shit. So they would offer a season pass for a relatively low cost of entry. But the craziest thing is that other fighting games would all adopt the season pass model from this point forward. And what would they do? They would not have the low barrier of entry. They would essentially adopt the season pass model and then still charge you full price for the game, which we talked about before. That like, oh shit, now it's like, now you did the season pass thing, but we still got to pay like a huge at the gate price, and then even more, and then even more, then even more. So fighting games are expensive. But there have been some efforts, right? There's Fantasy Strike, which has been a free-to-play fighting game. There is Brawlhalla, which I use as an example a lot, simply because this is why I like using Brawlhalla as an example. There's a shit ton of people playing it for sure. But I think even Brawlhalla fans will admit that the game isn't like the most graphically incredible game. You know? It's not. It's a relatively like focused Smash Brothers-esque game that its biggest attribute is that it's like Smash, right? In some way. And it's not the most appealing game in the world. Visually. It's just not. I'm not saying that's like a detriment to the quality of the game. I think what they have done with the free-to-play elements and getting people in is like super generous. And I think a lot of the stuff that's in that game should be directly copied over for a lot of situations, but maybe not everything. But that game's managed to be very successful, which is great. And one of the reasons it's successful is that, well, it's a Smash-like. There's a ton of Smash-likes that are popular and have varying degrees of popularity. But Brawlhalla is in like a different league of its own. What's the big thing that's different about that game? Well, you have a ton of other Smash-likes, you have a ton of other fighting games that have great online and netcode, right? So why isn't these games as big as Brawlhalla? There's one big outlier. Brawlhalla was essentially free-to-play and relatively generous with how its free-to-play offerings were. Here's a funny observation. Free-to-play or a full-price game don't warrant somebody's time. If I were to show you a fighting game, like let's just say even if it's like an existing franchise, right? A brand new fighting game. And it might even look good, but it has some things that you don't like about it, and it doesn't have any characters that you give a shit about. Will free-to-play make that game immediately popular? No. Would the game being full price, or even a discounted price, also increase the popularity of it? No. A good game is still a good game regardless of it being free-to-play or full price. People will show up for games if they're super fun, or they have creative elements to it, or they're actually good games, right? If they're actually good games. Just being free to play is not like a fix, right? And I'm actually super curious eventually, like how Brawlhalla has gotten to the levels that it is now, has gotten as big as it, where it's actually grown its audience over time. It's crazy, man. But there is no examples of fighting games that have come out and have tried to do anything like this. It can be done really wrong, and it can be done right. And a lot of people, not everybody, but a very healthy chunk of people don't have any faith it can be done right. And I think there's already a couple examples in the future where it could change, where things could be different. And it could change the way that people approach fighting games and a different model per se. Well, maybe not exactly a great example. Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown technically came out as a free-to-play. This is there's a caveat here. You had to pay for PS Plus, right? You had to be a part of like an audio subscription service. But their approach was the same, right? Their approach was sort of very similar that most free-to-play games have to hit up. They have a game that's old, that they're just making it look better, and we're going to release it at least in the first 3 months just to sort of gauge the audience to see if this could work. A lot of people downloaded the game, actually an exorbitant amount that sort of has shocked Sega, and apparently a lot of people probably bought the costumes because that was the only thing you could buy in the first couple months of the game being out. You could only buy costumes. That was it. The only thing that was purchasable was cosmetics, if not a goofy like VF1 mode. Apparently, people are like asking, well, how do you get your return investment on a free-to-play game, right? That's a huge risk from the devs. Think of it the other way. Isn't it a huge risk of the devs to release a fighting game and have it cost full price? Isn't it a huge risk to already have like a barrier of entry and hope that people will jump into it? I'd argue in the sake of Virtua Fighter, if that game came out at 30 bucks, do you think that many people would have bought it? I don't think so. They instead got people to buy like a $10 DLC pack, right? They got people to buy something small. You don't need to get the whole thing. Just take this one little thing that is for all your characters and all that shit. That was a good call. That was a very different way of approaching it, and still not the entire. That's not the degrees of which I would go, but they tried something, and apparently it's had a profound impact on Sega. And Sega's like, shit. How many of you guys have done this before? And they're like, we did it. It didn't work. Oh, but that was like 10 years ago. So to move our conversation forward, the big elephant in the room that everyone's talking about in this free-to-play argument is Project L. We don't even know that Project L is going to be free-to-play. It's just assumed. And the funniest thing about this entire conversation about free-to-play fighting games and how they really can like ruin the industry, destroy it, the fact that this will be the end of like the fighting game community in some way, like this is it, it's gonna be fucked from this point forward. And then some other people in the complete opposite end, like, no, this is the way it goes. I'm kind of in the middle in how I would approach it, but almost everybody agrees Project L is going to be huge. That game's going to be huge. It's going to be an industry changer, right? Because it already has a pretty decent art style. It looks like it's going to fun-ass tag game. It's got a couple of elements that I'm really into, where I just want to play it because it's the game it is. And it's got cool characters. Everyone sort of is cool with Project L being free to play. And that's kind of weird to me. Like the very large majority of people just assume it's going to be free to play, and because of the history of Riot, and just think it's going to be the biggest thing ever. Why? Because, well, it's attached to something a lot of people like, right? It's already attached to a huge property, you know, and it's going to be a fighting game. It's going to be a team-based fighting game. So it's probably going to be fucking massive. I have to ask, like, what makes that one okay? And is it because of the history of some of the other free-to-play elements of Riot games? Some Riot games, I don't know if it's like the most predatory thing in the world, where with League of Legends, because once again, I haven't played League, I haven't played Valorant, I haven't played Runeterra or any of this shit. But those games, for the most part, allow people to play the game and not spend any money. And potentially, depending on what you want to get out of it, you don't have to grind a ton. I don't know if Project L is going to do that, and I don't think they should do that. I think Project L should be something that All the characters are free. Even if you have to unlock things, right? Even if you have to unlock things, I think that's actually too much. I think fighting games need to go out of their fucking way to make their multiplayer experience as accessible as possible. We have a few examples, and here's the thing. League is going to be the game. League of Fighters, if it is the way people think it's going to be, is going to be the game that a lot of people will be eyeballing. And even the Japanese devs are saying the same thing. Even some of the biggest Japanese executives are laser focused on what's happening with League of Fighters. And they're like, if it works there, then holy shit, that could be the change of the industry sort of thing. For the worse or the better, right? For potentially the absolutely abhorrent and greedy, or like some efforts of some fighting games, relatively trying to do something to allow people to play their game for the cheapest possible, if not nothing. That's the thing that I'm looking at. I'm looking at fighting games that go out of their way to try to be on the side of the player, to get people involved in playing the game online, especially if not trying out the game for literally nothing. Like, just play it. Just try it. See if you like it. If people like things, if games are good, people will invest. If games are good and games are don't have an insanely aggressive, like free-to-play, greedy element to them, then people will want to invest into games. People will want to support games so that they can get more. Multiverses is a great example of how this is most likely it's going to go. Multiverses, I don't know what its unlock thing is, but the game is free to play, right? It's a 2v2 platform fighting game, very similar to Brawlhalla in many ways. And that game is going to be most likely a very early standard of whatever the heck they're going to do with free to play and how they're going to do it. Has a lot of characters people like, you know, might not have the gameplay that everybody likes, but I think a lot of people are going to try it just because the barrier of entry is going to be ridiculously low. I haven't even seen anything on it yet, so we don't know. We have no knowledge or information if a fighting game commits to this, if it's going to be good. But those are the tests, right? Those are the turning tests of fighting game free-to-play elements, where there's the ancient stuff, the really old stuff that we talked about, and there's the new games, the multiverses, and the Project L whenever, God forbid, if it comes out in the next 5 years.